Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 9th and final webinar in the World Gastroenterology Organization Climate Course for Global Gastroenterology. My name is Geoffrey Metz, and I'm the chairman of the WGO Climate Change Committee and president-elect of the organization. The role of the WGO as the lead organization of a federation of 119 member societies is to inform, to educate, and to advocate on matters related to gastroenterology and hepatology. There has been increasing interest in climate change since 2013 at the WGO, and we've included climate change sessions in our conferences since 2015. This course of 9 webinars has been running since March the 8th. And if I could have my first slide, please, Jim. The course over the 3 months, I'll just wait for Jim to put that up. It's sharing now. As you know, it has run from the basic issues of greenhouse gas effect on climate through the impact of climate change on gastrointestinal health. We went through global warming, effects on food and water security, and right through to the contribution of gastroenterologists to creating the problem themselves. That is, we produce a lot of greenhouse gas. It all sounded like gloom and doom for several of our sessions, but we have the chance to move to mitigation and adaptation. I believe we will achieve that, and I believe we will, if you like, save the planet. And today we have Nick Watts and Bishr Omary to help us navigate these complex solutions. Before I introduce Nick and Bishr, I'd like to acknowledge the huge body of work performed by my friends and colleagues on the steering committee led by Leddin, who we particularly owe a huge debt of gratitude, Des, and including Bishr Omary, Andy Veach, Guilherme, Macedo, and Mei Ling Perman, who developed the series over the last 6 months or more, and the wonderful support we've also had from the WGO administration, particularly Jim Milberg, Marissa Lopez, and Zach Blevins, in mounting the series onto Zoom. Slide 2, please, Jim. Those who've spoken on the course are the world's experts on each of the topics we asked them to address. They included Anthony Costello and Hugh Montgomery, who pioneered the Lancet countdown. And indeed, if you look through those names, you'll recognize people who really are world leaders on each of these topics. I'd remind you that the webinars are up on the WGO website and can be used as you wish for teaching and advocating purposes. And I'm pleased to also tell you that the webinars have been accepted for publication as abridged commentaries in GUT later this year. Today, our 2 moderators are Chris Mulder and Anahita Sadeghi. Chris is affiliated with the Department of Gastroenterology and Hepatology at the VU University Medical Center in Amsterdam, Netherlands, and in addition to being a member of our Climate Change Committee, has been a valued member of the review team of several of our WGO guidelines. Anahita is affiliated with the Digestive Disease Research Center at Tehran University of Medical Sciences in Iran. Her research interests include gastroenterology, medical education, and climate change. And Anahita is also a member of the WGO Clinical Research Committee. So, to today's speakers, it's particularly appropriate to have 2 absolute experts to navigate us through the way out of the climate change crisis. The first speaker will be Dr. Nick Watts, who's the Chief Sustainability Officer of the National Health Service in the United Kingdom, responsible for its commitment to deliver a world-class net zero emission health service. And it's quite extraordinary the progress that's been made by Nick and his team in a very short period of time. They are clearly the world leaders in achieving these changes. Prior to being in the NHS, Nick worked internationally as the executive director of the Lancet Countdown, who I mentioned before as the leading commission on health and climate change, a collaboration of UN agencies and academic centres around the world. And I'll introduce the second speaker, Bishr Omary, a little later. So perhaps if we could go straight to Nick first, please, Jim, and we'll go from there.
Okay, hello from the depths of British bureaucracy. From an Australian, I hope you can hear in my accent. And listen, thank you, Geoffrey. Thanks everyone for having me. I'm really excited to be here. It's important. I'm going to be really simple. I'm going to talk for as short as we can because I think the questions are going to be far more interesting than the actual substance of any boring presentation. But I'm going to talk about three things. I'm going to talk about the why, I'm going to talk about the what, and I'm going to talk about how. Why? Why would a healthcare system like the NHS care about climate change? Why would we be running at this challenge? Once you've decided that you care about it, what are you going to do about it? And the most important question, by far the most important question in sustainability, how? What does this look like at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning? Far too often in sustainability, we get caught up on the 2045, 2050 question. Oh, we can't quite think about what the last step in this 1,000-mile journey looks like, and we let it paralyze us. The why is simple, quite frankly. The NHS exists to deliver high-quality care for all, now and for future generations. It's existed as the world's first healthcare system with coverage provided free at the point of care for 75 years. We're good health professionals, we're good scientists, and we know, because we've read the IPCC reports, we've read the pretty terrifying climate science. We know that you cannot do that. We know that if you are a high-functioning healthcare system, you cannot serve the needs of your population unless you tackle climate change. It'll overwhelm you. For the NHS, we know that we expect a doubling of the number of NHS facilities on high-risk floodplains, a doubling. We expect a tripling of the frequency and of the duration, and it's the duration that really matters, of fatal heat waves in the United Kingdom. Heat in the UK is a little different to heat in Australia, but the population and the infrastructure is adapted differently. We know that we have to respond because the threat to climate change is serious, because the climate crisis is a health crisis. But listen, we also know that we need to respond, and it's a good thing to respond, because every time we've done it, every single time, we have saved money, our staff have loved it, and our patients have loved it. We know we need to respond because the alignment between the things that you want to do to tackle climate change, the alignment to what it means to be just a good, high-functioning healthcare system, efficient healthcare system, delivering high-value care for our patients, they're almost 100%. The final reason why the NHS might care about this: we're big. 150, 160, 170 billion pounds of spend, 1.4 million healthcare professionals. We're basically a medium to small size country. By far the most important resource that the NHS has is our 1.4 million healthcare professionals. Passionate, engaged, expert. When you go out and you ask them, hey, what do you care about? What do you want to see the NHS do more of? The response is thunderous. They shout back, I want to work for an NHS. I want to work for an organization that is living up to my own values, primum non nocere. I want to work for an NHS that is tackling climate change. If you've decided that this is important, and I sort of think if you're on this call, you probably have, and quite frankly, I don't have many conversations with anyone really left anymore who hasn't decided that this is important. You then have to ask, okay, well, what do I do about that? And the unfortunate answer is, well, listen, we've sat on our hands for a little while here, 10, 20, 30 years perhaps. There's not much more time to spare, and so you have to run at this challenge. You don't just do one or two things. You don't just turn the lights off and turn the temperature up or down, depending on where you are. You do everything. Every single place you can find carbon, every single place you can find emissions, you tackle. You reduce them down to what we call net zero, as far as you can possibly go, and you go as fast as you can possibly go. For the NHS, this means 2040 for the emissions that we control directly. It means 2045 for our full, total global footprint, because we know healthcare doesn't start and stop at the four walls of a hospital or a clinic. We know that our impact is global, and so we have to take responsibility for that. You run at this as fast as you can. The second you think you might be able to hit that 2040, that 2045 target, you bring it forward and you run a little faster. The why and the what, though, they are easy. It's very easy to talk about projections of flood and heat out into the future. Very easy to talk about 2040, 2045 targets. They're a long way away. The far, far, far more interesting question, and frankly, I sort of think the only question we should ever ask ourselves, is what does this look like at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning? If you aren't talking about climate change and the response to climate change as something that has a day-by-day response, then you're in the wrong timescale, I think. Let me talk just a little bit about the NHS. The other thing I'm going to do here is I'm only going to talk about things that have happened in the last 12 months or that we think are coming up in the next 12 months, because again, we just don't have time to rest on our laurels. So for the NHS, governance matters. We're big. Hundreds and hundreds of hospitals out across the country, thousands of buildings, 65,000 buildings, second largest fleet in the country, fifth largest organization in the world. Governance matters. It can be a little dry. The Health and Care Act of 2022 was the first piece of legislation anywhere in the world to say it very, very clearly, to say we're not asking nicely anymore. Right on the face of the bill, a high-functioning healthcare system tackles climate change. And if you want to be a hospital in the NHS, we expect you to have a net zero strategy aligned with our national trajectory. We expect you to have a board level, senior leadership taking this on. And you've got to have the capacity to run it. We want those strategies to be informed by local preference. We want them to be informed by your patients, by your clinicians, by your communities. We want them to work for you. Every single hospital in the country has its own net zero strategy, and every single hospital is running at this challenge in its own interesting, weird, wonderful, and damn impressive way. We've got to think seriously about where our buckets of carbon are, about where our emissions are. So let's start with our hospitals. When we think about a healthcare system, often we think about a hospital. Two things we've had to do there. Number one, we've had to invest. There's a myth I just want to quickly take a second to talk about. People say, oh, I would do net zero, I would tackle climate change, but listen, it's going to cost way too much. They're wrong. Number one, you can act on 72% of the emissions profile of a healthcare system without any additional capital pressure. This is principally about how we deliver care, principally about the purchasing decisions, the clinical decisions that we make every day as health professionals in a healthcare system. There is, though, a capital pressure, okay? And I don't want to pretend that there's no cost at all. For something the size of the NHS, we estimate it to be about £7.7 billion over the next 10 years, £770 million a year. Actually not that big for something as big as the NHS. Actually quite manageable, especially when you take a slightly longer horizon and you say, do you know what? Every time the NHS is invested in net zero, every time the NHS is invested in decarbonising its healthcare system itself, it has saved money. In fact, the average return on investment for the average intervention our team has put in place, 3.6 years. Nothing has an ROI in healthcare like that. It's pretty remarkable. You do have to invest, though. We've invested heavily, 500, 600 million, 800 million over the last 2 years or so. Now, some quick mathematicians at home will say, hey, that's not quite the full amount of money that you said you needed. And that's right. We're still working on getting up to the full amount. But listen, I can tell you £800 million is £800 million better than where we were yesterday. And it is enough to have a third of NHS trusts currently building solar panels on their roofs. It is enough to have heat pumps up and down the country, decarbonising, moving away from our oil and, keep it quiet, even at one point, until a little bit recently, coal boilers that the NHS used to have. We've had to invest in our estate, and it is paying dividends. We have also had to make sure that when we build new hospitals, when we retrofit existing buildings, we're building them to the right standard, that they are worthy of being an NHS hospital, worthy of of the patients and the clinicians who are inside them. And so we have a new net zero hospital standard. Everything over £50 million built within the NHS complying to this standard. It is damn impressive. It's long, a couple of 100 pages, so maybe read the executive summary. It's an impressive, deeply technical standard that we're pretty proud of. The hospitals matter. We call them fixed assets. The other thing that matters, the other most obvious thing when someone thinks hospital, someone thinks healthcare system, they think ambulance. Our transport matters. And I mentioned briefly, we are the second largest fleet in the country, second only to Royal Mail. The NHS is just big. Depending on the city you're in, depending on the time of day, we can be responsible for up to 1/5 of road traffic in a city in the United Kingdom. We are big. There's two sides of this. Number one, for your vans, for your cars, anytime you're moving goods around, decarbonize the hell out of that. You need to electrify that fleet. And frankly, we are having trusts up and down the country who are just doing that naturally because, God, it's just good common business sense. Manchester Foundation Trust, I think, is one vehicle away from being entirely electric. That is so impressive. Those vehicles relatively easy to decarbonize. You have innovation happening right across the world that you're able to take advantage of. The slightly harder part is our niche vehicles, is our rapid response and our ambulances, our double crewed ambulances. There, no one else is going to invent something like that for us. And so the NHS has had to innovate. We have had to innovate and create the world's first zero-emission ambulance, and then the world's second zero-emission ambulance. And now we are purchasing them from the manufacturers faster than they can produce them for us. We have a new electrification strategy coming out in just a heartbeat, and 3 seconds after that, a new national standard. The NHS only wants electric ambulances because we know that they are good for business. We know they're good for patients. We know our patients love them. Less air pollution, frankly, quieter rides. Saving money for the NHS that we're then able to reinvest. So we have to invest in our governance, in our hospitals, in our ambulances, in our procurement, in our supply chain. I told you we were taking responsibility for the emissions right beyond the NHS because we know that we are responsible for the things that come into the hospital, and we know that we're responsible for the waste that goes out. So we're taking responsibility for that. We've been clear within the decade, the NHS will not purchase from anyone that does not meet or exceed our commitments on net zero. It's a little fluffy when someone says within the decade. You kind of want to go, oh, that sounds like a word you've devised so you didn't have to be specific. What's the catch? Let me be more specific. 1 minute past midnight, April 1st, 2027, the NHS will no longer purchase from anyone. We don't want to enter into financial negotiations at all with anyone that does not have a net zero strategy publicly approved by their board, available for everyone to see, aligned with our own, moving just as fast or faster. We want to know that we're purchasing, that we're working with healthcare companies around the world that care about this just as much as I do. 2027 is a little way off into the future, and so we have a roadmap that gets us there. A year or two ago, 10% weighting into everything the NHS purchases, 10% weighting for net zero. Not enough to shift every single procurement, but enough to start a conversation between our thousands of procurement officers, between our nurses, between our clinical staff, and the people they're purchasing from. Just a month or two ago, new net zero requirements, carbon reduction requirements into all contracts over £5 million, and skip forward another 12 months or so. We're going to start to expand that to every contract. The NHS is serious about this. And you know, when we turn around to 10, 20, 30 of our biggest, most critical suppliers, their first response is, you can't be serious. Then they see our face. They sometimes see that I'm a little bit grumpy. They think about it a bit. They go and speak to some of their clients in other countries. They go and speak to the United States. They speak to the healthcare system in Germany. They turn around and they say, yeah, okay, you're not the only people asking for this. This is going to be challenging. We're going to have to do it together, but we think we can do this. The governance matters. The hospitals matter. The ambulance matters. Procurement matters. The stuff that you buy, the medicines, the medical devices, they matter. The final thing that matters, the absolute most, more important than anything else, I think, is you have got to have fun. You have got to have fun. You have got to remember that this is only going to work if we are having fun as we go. When you look around any rugby match, when you look around any parliament, it is the team that is high-fiving, that are smiling. Those are the guys I'd put my money on winning. This has got to be a journey that we are learning, that we are thriving as we go on. Give you a bit of an anecdote on this. We had a micro grant scheme that we put out last year, about 12 months ago. If you were a clinician somewhere in the front line of the NHS, if you're a nurse, a pharmacist, a GP, you had a cool idea. You had always thought, God, does it have to be this way? Do we have to run this service in that way? I reckon we could do this better. We had £5,000. We had £10,000 for you. The criteria was simple. You had to directly tackle climate change. You had to directly reduce the emissions of your service. You had to directly improve the health of your patients. And you had to have fun. You had to shout about it. You had to learn something. We wanted to see some happy faces. We thought, I remember designing this, I think actually sitting in this room, designing the scheme, and we were saying, well, listen, 2022 is pretty busy for the NHS, so we could imagine if our clinicians were otherwise occupied. If we get 50, 60 applications, maybe we would feel pretty proud of ourselves because it would be a really nice sort of start. Maybe we would double that next year. We had to close the application process early. We had 7,000 applications. We had forgotten that when you go out and you ask NHS staff, hey, what do you care about? 91% of them shout back. 91% of them shout back, I want to work for an NHS that is tackling climate change. I want to work for an organization that's living up to my own values, and I'm going to have some fun as I go. One of the projects that was funded through one of our innovation grants, another anecdote, sorry, down in the Isle of Wight, rapid medication delivery for some oncology drugs. Normally takes a hovercraft, a truck, and a van to get there. It's a slightly remote trust in the United Kingdom. Now takes a single electric drone. Drugs get there just in time. It is cheaper. It's better for our patients. It's better for our clinicians, and it saves carbon. Not an enormous amount of carbon, but that's okay. It saves carbon. Ticks all of the boxes. And do you know my favorite part about the entire thing is the pictures of the first fleet of drones landing as they were delivering the drugs. You see the nurses run out, collect the drugs, and run back in to go and treat their patient. And if you look at the picture, if you look just in the background, pressed up against every single window in the hospital, all of the clinicians, the nurses, the doctors, the patients, the visitors, everyone. They were excited, they were proud that their hospital was leading the way, that their hospital had come up with a new, damn cool way of delivering care for their patients, delivering value for their patients. It was really, really special. The governance matters, the hospitals, the ambulances, the procurement, the medicines, the medical devices, and fun matter. Before I end, Geoffrey, you sent through a few questions you want to make sure I touch on. I hope I've done an okay job. One of them was, can the success of the NHS be replicated to other regions of the world? It already has been. Everywhere you look, you are seeing new teams being set up in the United States, in Canada, in Australia, God forbid, probably even in New Zealand. Yes, even in New Zealand, in Germany, in France. The NHS was the first healthcare system in the world to make a commitment like this, and the first healthcare system to run at this. But I promise you, we will not be the last. It's when others start to get moving. It's when others start to get moving quickly. It's when we get a little bit of fun competition going. It's when this is no longer just something that's possible, no longer just something that's positive, that has some nice side effects and benefits. That's when this starts to become the inevitable future direction of healthcare. Thank you very, very much. Look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very, very much indeed, Nick, and very, very both entertaining, but also very, very important. And leading the way, I really think that the emphasis not only on getting the job done, but the emphasis on having fun really is critically important, because as I mentioned right at the start, gloom and doom is what a lot of people feel when they look at the huge concerns that we all have about where is climate change taking us. If the solving the problem is linked to having fun along at the same time, that's important. So thank you again, Nick. I hope you're all looking to put your questions into the chat box. Question time will come up as soon as we've had our talk from Bishr Omary. Professor Omary, Senior Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs and Research at the Center for Advanced Biotechnology and Medicine at Rutgers University in the United States. Bishr is serving as a course director on this webinar series, and we, in putting together this, have had a lot of fun together as we've been getting there. And having said that, Bishr is also a former president of the American Gastroenterological Association. So, Jim, I think that should have given you a minute to get Bishr's talk up into the can, and let's run with that next. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Metz, for the introduction. It's such a huge honor for me to be sharing the podium here with Dr. Watts, and who's just been an amazing work. He gave a fantastic presentation. So thank you so much. Now, some of you, I know you just heard Dr. Watts' presentation, may not know this, but he also is a blogger. And in fact, if you look at the NHS website, there's a number of blogs by Dr. Watts. I would encourage you to view them because they have so much detail that can be helpful for all of us. So I have no conflicts of interest to declare. We'll get right into the presentation. I'm going to try to cover briefly 4 topics. So basically, this is a bit similar to Dr. Watts' presentation, the why, the what, and the how. So a foundation is why invest in education, training, and research. And there's really one of the reasons is really, in fact, as to the why has been presented already in the 8 prior presentations in this WGO course. And the nice thing about all the presentations, in fact, is that they're open access. So any one of us can click on this particular link and view the 8 prior presentations. And this last one for today will be available in the next couple of days. So just by a few working definitions, when we're talking about education, of course, it's acquiring knowledge. Training is developing practical skills. And it is these two coming together that helps develop the research workforce, which really has been our past, it's our present, and also it's our future. And it is that research workforce, in fact, that is fundamental for making the research discoveries and innovation in the area of any one of us can fill in the blank. Obviously, in this case, it's climate change, mitigation, and sustainability. So the populations that are most impacted by this, and this was covered in session 3, are communities of color, older adults, low-income communities, and children. And in the case of children, this was covered in the last session, and the youth is really that's our future. And I think what was briefly covered in the last presentation is that 25% of the current 8 billion world population is under 15, and of that 8 billion, 8.2% is under the age of 5. The United Nations has an office that tracks the countries that are most impacted by the climate change. And in this case, it's really the least developed countries, landlocked developing countries, and also small island developing countries. And the United Nations also has the Sustainable Development Goals. And of the 17 goals, goal number 10 is to reduce inequalities. And unfortunately, the current global refugee figures have been increasing tremendously. And for example, looking between 2015 and 2021, the increase of refugees is about 45% or so, making up roughly more than 300 per 100,000 individuals. And this number, as we all know, has increased since 2021. So moving on to education and training areas. For any important area, in this case, of course, talking about climate change mitigation, it's important to start from an educational perspective as early as possible. So starting before college, of course, there's college, graduate and professional schools, health profession trainees, and this entire group, of course, makes up the learners. In addition, another key important aspect of education is really working with the communities as a group, and also working with individuals within communities. And this is obviously clearly important from a population health perspective. Working with the communities and individual and the population provides an essential advocacy group in terms of influencing decision makers, be it the political bodies and the funding agencies. Another aspect of advocacy comes in aside from public opinion is the medical society, all our collective societies, and also providing life examples of the impact of the research that is taking place to try to address the problem that's on hand. In terms of training and educational opportunities, I'm just showing just a few examples here. So certainly in the United States, I'm just showing two examples. There's an entire school that's Climate, Earth, and Societies. This is at Columbia University. At UCLA, there's an Institute of Environment and Sustainability across many countries. In the UK, in Australia, and in India, there are opportunities to get either undergraduate training, master training, and also PhD training dealing with environment and sustainability. In terms of residency training, certainly in the United States, and I know that there's some also similar engagement of residents in other countries. Here in the United States, there's actually two publications. Those who are interested can take screenshots of those. But so at two hospitals in Boston, now embedded within residency curriculum are lectures pertaining to climate change and health. And also, similarly, at other institutions, again, here in the United States, there was a publication that I encourage you to look through dealing with climate change and the practice of medicine. And this was, the first author of this is Dr. Phillipsborn, who was a speaker in session 8, and she touched on this in terms of what's going on at her own institution. Now, speaking of Dr. Phillipsborn, she also is the co-editor of a supplement that is that will be published by a journal called Journal of General Medical Education. This particular journal is published by the major accreditation organization here in the United States that accredits all the residency and fellowship trainings in the US. This particular supplement special issue is co-edited by the faculty shown here, and there's a call for publications, whether it's reviews, whether it's commentaries, or original research dealing specifically with residency and fellowship training. I recently contacted just the last couple of days Dr. Phillipsborn to specifically ask, is this also possible for international GME articles? And her answer and quotes here, yes, absolutely. In addition, it could be helpful to maybe present articles that have to do with collaborations across different countries and in terms of sharing best practices. And another important aspect of education is patient education, of course. And the website Healthcare Without Harm has a number of resources that are absolutely terrific in terms of patient education. And what's listed here is a number of health systems in the United States. There's also information from the American College of Physicians. I highlight here in blue my green box. We had a talk by Dr. Sack that was in session number 7. And on his website, there is 12 different so-called, they're just waiting room brochures that patients can browse. They could also be provided to patients. There are posters that could be obtained. And also in Boston, there are fact sheets. And in fact, those fact sheets are translated into 10 different languages. All of us are involved in different GI and societies and nursing societies. And just in the last Digestive Disease Week meeting, just held in last May, there were 3 different symposia dealing with climate change. It's a record. And the nice thing about this is that within the AGA, there is a website that is AGA University, and they have about 500 different resource entries. Most of them one needs to be an AGA member, but not all of them. And I just learned yesterday that, in fact, AGA University, with approval of AGA, will be make available all the three symposia that were held at DDW, and these will be open access, so one doesn't need to be an AGA member. But as you can see here, a number of international societies, in fact, have, and this is, it's not a complete list by any stretch, but just to show you the breadth of what's going on internationally in terms of highlighting the importance of climate change as related to GI health. So moving on to the what areas we in terms of are available in terms of opportunities. One could start, for example, with basic science research. That is one area, but then translating this into humans, into patients, into practice, and also into communities. So this entire spectrum is available in terms of research opportunities. In terms of the climate change impact on health, and also in turn to the healthcare systems, there's really a vicious cycle because that also contributes to climate change, and it's a feed-forward negative detrimental cycle. So the research opportunities really are at the intersection of these different arrows. So helping, for example, in terms of healthcare sustainability efforts, individual and community resilience, and so on. There's also tremendous opportunities in terms of greening endoscopy. I apologize. And in that case, efforts aimed at wasteful procedures, and also the environmental impact of the procedures that we're all involved with. Other areas of research have to do with the impact of greenhouse gases, be it in terms of direct emissions coming from healthcare facilities, emissions from purchased electricity, steam, and so on. And then the biggest contributor to accumulation of greenhouse gases is so-called scope 3, and that's the healthcare supply chains. So all these areas really are potential areas of investigation. In session 2, it was nicely covered in terms of the impact on different digestive health diseases, be it infections, liver disease, and so on. And also this was covered in the strategic plan that the Multi-Society Task Force developed here in the United States. So some specifics. Obviously, stress is one key byproduct, unfortunate byproduct of the climate change crisis globally. Now, stress can have a huge impact on the brain-gut axis, and this in turn can affect a number of different GI diseases, be it reflux, peptic ulcer disease, irritable bowel syndrome, and also inflammatory bowel disease. In the context of the liver, there's a terrific commentary given by Professor Donnelly, published in both Gastroenterology and Journal of Hepatology, that I would encourage you to review if you haven't seen it. But the bottom line, really, in terms of liver disease, and this was also covered by Dr. Donnelly in her presentation in session 2, in terms of the burden, it's really fatty liver disease, be it non-alcoholic or alcoholic, and also viral hepatitis. In the case of the pancreas, stress also is a huge problem, and there's a number of studies in experimental system that clearly show them the impact, the negative impact of stress in terms of, in fact, promoting susceptibility to pancreatitis and progression of pancreatitis. And the same thing also in experimental models in terms of development of precancerous lesions of the pancreas. Another important area that's growing is the plastics, but it's really the microplastics. And looking at, it's estimated, in fact, that in general, the consumption of plastics in the form of microplastic is roughly 5 grams per week. If you annualize this, that's about 1/4 kilogram per year. Now, it's not really the issue if I ingest a small plastic bag without causing an outlet obstruction and so on, then that will just go straight through and it's not an issue. It's really the microplastic, the small plastic particles that are the issue, because those, in fact, can get absorbed through a GI system and can end up in any organ, including GI organs. In fact, if one looks in the stool, there's a nice study showing that you can quantify and observe different kinds of plastics in the stool, be it, for example, polypropylene, which is the most common, and polystyrene. Also, microplastic particles have been found, for example, in the livers in patients with cirrhosis. So that now the impact of this, of course, is just being unfolded, and this is a wide open area of research. Now, going on to the how in terms of research funding and opportunities. This, of course, varies between the different countries. It can be locally at the health system, medical school, or university. Those usually tend to be a little bit smaller grants, but everything counts. Micro grants can make a huge impact. At the state or national governmental level, which I will touch on a little bit, in the United States, foundations, industry, and philanthropic donations. So for the next slides, I won't have time to delve into the slides in detail. We can take snapshots, but this is an opportunity here. The United States is the major research funder in the National Institutes of Health, I apologize, is the agency here in the United States that is the major research funder. They provide roughly $45 billion a year. And there is specific requests for application for grants that specifically have to do with climate change and health. These are, in fact, large grants that span 2 to 5 years, and we're talking about the hundreds of thousands of dollars per year. There are also career development opportunities, and this is for early career scientists who are specifically focusing in their training and research on areas pertaining to climate change and health. And also the NIH has a nice program, the Climate and Health Scholars Program. This is a one-year program, early career trainees that can be involved with, and it exposes them to the different research institutes within the National Institutes of Health. This is the intramural program. There are also some funding opportunities, and this is the application. And there's a webinar for the next cycle, which is coming up, and that actually is being held today on the 28th, but it will be available online to try to give you, those who are interested, ideas how to apply and what the focus might be. Another important funding agency in the United States is the National Science Foundation, and there's also a number of different grant opportunities. Again, you can take a screenshot of this if you're interested. The Environmental Protection Agency also provides some resources, and this really focuses on mitigating cumulative health impacts and environmental health disparities in underserved communities here in the United States. Another funding agency is the so-called ARPA, and this has funds that are earmarked about $2.5 billion through 2025. And the requests for applications are just coming up, and you can look at the website. But an important point here, in fact, is emphasis on climate change as relates to health is an area of focus, that also in terms of funding opportunities. Here in the United States, also the White House and the Department of Human Health Services, there is a pledge that different organizations, industry, universities, health systems can take. And this began in 2022. The reason I show this is because this ability to take the pledge has been extended, and the extension now goes through November 1st, 2023. So far, there's more than 100 different institutions that have taken the pledge. And taking the pledge means that they have to demonstrate that they've committed to undertake efforts to, for example, look at their carbon footprint, address climate change impacts on health specifically. Those who have joined the pledge as of November 1st will be announced at the upcoming COP28 that will be held in 2023, end of November, early December. From the research perspective, there are several industries, in fact, that have taken the pledge. So those industries, for example, Pfizer, Philips, AstraZeneca are some examples. You can look at the website and see the list. Those might be interested, in fact, in partnering with you as investigators in terms of looking at research opportunities. So far, the list does not include any of the companies that are involved, for example, in endoscopy. So this is an opportunity. In the United States, it does not include any of the GI societies. So this also is another opportunity. Another funding agencies is for us welcome. These are grants of $2,500 to $50,000. The application deadline is for this year. Is coming up in the middle of July or so. So this might be something, depending if it's it might make sense to you. Philanthropy is really a huge contributor in terms of research opportunities here in the United States, and I suspect also in other countries. This is a list of different organizations that are providing specific resources related to climate change and health. And one point to make here, at least in the United States, is that those funds that are available now have increased tremendously in the last couple of years. So now hovering around $12 billion of available funds. So just to close, and just with a few takeaways. There was the first session really covered kind of what the ABCs, if you will, of climate change and health, but also the impact of this. And obviously for all of us, it's important to think globally, but each one of us in our own workplace and our own at our home, we can act locally, whatever the case might be, to make an impact, and this can be huge. The other thing just to emphasize is really I've touched on education, training, and research. So there are lots of opportunities for every one of us to be an educator, to be a trainer, and also to be a researcher, and in fact, all of the above. The other important point is that research translation is really a team sports. So it starts, of course, with investigators and trainees. It could be collaborations, team science, if you will, interacting also with industry partners to try to address GI-specific, endoscopy-specific efforts, mitigation, carbon footprint, reducing waste, and so on, and also working with the communities. The glue for all this really can be the GI societies, and the laboratory here can either be your clinic, your endoscopy suite, as a research scientist or a physician investigator, nurse investigator, wet or dry research lab, and also locations within different communities. Advocacy is a huge thing, and that's in terms of planetary health. And I just will close here with this quote by Eva Lewis: "To be an activist is to speak, to be an advocate is to listen. Society can't move forward without both." So each one of us can be both an activist and an advocate to try to improve our planetary health, specifically in this case, dealing with the GI health. So just to close, I'd like to thank my friends and colleagues who helped put this course together. And also a shout out to Dr. Naima Amrani, who is the past president of WGO. The WGO Climate Change Working Group, in fact, started under her presidency. And we've been promoted, I guess, this working group from a working group to a committee that will have a seat at the table. I think that's going to be quite helpful. And just a shout out to others who have really been helpful with the course and to me in terms of slide preparation. Working with the Climate Change Working Group with WGO has been absolutely fantastic. And the representation of the committees are really shown by these flags here that are shown. And it's just been wonderful to see that kind of all the GI societies coming together to work on this important effort. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much indeed, Bishr. And I will hand over to the moderators, Chris Mulder, I introduced previously, and Anahita hopefully is online as well, for the question and answer. I think before Chris asking you to take questions and answers forward on the moderation session, I love the fact that we're talking not just about fun, we're talking about teamwork, we're talking about collaboration. And I think the way forward when things are achieved rapidly and effectively, those three parts are a really important part of making that happen. So over to you, Chris.
Well, very nice overview, and I'm happy to have questions, of course, but I don't see any questions at the moment there. But maybe I have a question already for Bishr. What we see since COVID is that we do so much more telemedicine instead of face-to-face out-clinic work. And if you calculate the benefit for this in carbon and green gases, etc., it's huge. So in, for instance, celiac disease, IBD follow-up, I think at the moment we do 70 to 80% of our patients not anymore face-to-face. What do you think about this sort of thing? Question for Bishr.
Can you hear me okay? Thank you, Chris, for the question. Yeah, I think you bring up a very important point. That's one of the few silver linings of the pandemic, that global pandemic. So in terms of delivery of care, that's really going to be the future. And it's going to be also in disorders that one wouldn't think that it would be possible to actually see a patient and evaluate the patient remotely. And there's a lot of improvements, for example, in being able to using sensors and so on to look at vital signs, and to correlate subtle changes in vital signs in terms of worsening of disease. Particularly, this is in behavioral health. We heard also from Nick about drones delivering medications. So that I think is going to be the future. We're going to getting used to things flying around, making sure we duck our heads as these drones are traveling. But I think that the technology in terms of devices, sensors, that's also growing exponentially, and that's going to kind of merge together with the ability to be able to deliver quality telemedicine care to our patients.
Anahita, do you have a question?
Thank you, Nicholas and Bishr, for insightful and inspiring presentation. I also want to thank Geoffrey for chairing this session. I'm sure we all learn a lot from your expertise and experience. There isn't any question here, but I have a question for Nicholas. It's a very interesting point he mentioned in his presentation, the integration of fund and delivery of system and toward minimizing carbon footprint. Would you please provide more example and how we use this technology for minimizing the carbon footprint?
I think Nick may not be able to join us. Is that right?
Yes, yes. Nick was hoping to come, and if not, he was hoping to get one of his colleagues to be on the question and answer. I don't see anyone face on the screen, but is there anyone else who's online from his department? I don't think we know.
Okay.
Well,
can I ask a question from Bishr?
Of course.
How do you see the role of the academia and research in advancing a sustainable future? You are hopeful?
I think the academia really can play a huge role, because the academia, by definition, Anahita, is the source of the investigators, the source of the trainees also, who are, and part of being in the university is advancing scholarly work and research. Of course, there are institutions that are more research intensive and others that are not. The ones that are not can in fact provide, contribute to the workforce. And they can also help in terms of small projects. Nick, for example, touched on these micro or mini grants. These also, we find, even though I'm part of a quote unquote research intensive institution, we also have these micro grants for efforts that now we're putting together also for climate change. We're kind of following the NHS model. And it's really quite remarkable what the micro grant can do, because the driving force really is the passion. And the passion also, by definition, brings this fun part that Dr. Metz talked about. So to answer, the short answer to your question is, I think the institutions, for those of us who are part of a university setting, or even within a hospital, doesn't have to be university, because hospitals also are establishing sustainability committees that includes nurses, respiratory therapists, physicians, and so on, to try to look at the carbon footprint of the hospital. So it's not only happening at the NHS. NHS has been a terrific driver of this, but as Dr. Watson mentioned, I mean, this is really, it's catching, it's growing worldwide.
Chris, I can see a question there from Leddin. He's got his hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Geoffrey, and thank you, everyone. Bishr, my question is for you, but it refers to something which Nick Watts said, and I think he referred to sometimes the problem can seem overwhelming. So my question for you is, what advice would you give to people when they're starting out looking at either education or research priorities? Where do you start with such a big elephant in the room? Thanks.
I think the approach to this needs to be top down and bottoms up. What I mean by that is, in terms of top down, hopefully the leadership can play a key role in this. And at the level of our small hub, if you will, we are getting now a lot of encouragement and pressure, both, and resources, for example, from the government, whether it's state, federal, or even local. Because the importance of climate change is being realized. So one point of this is coming from above. In terms of bottoms up, it's really, I mean, it's amazing to see the youth, the trainees taking interest, the students taking interest in this. But at the end of the day, there's also skeptics out there. There are few. I guess in the UK it's only 9%. But this also, we see this in the United States. I certainly see it, for example, even within our own institution. There's so many other important things. Do we really need to spend so much money on this, on that? So I think it's really important to listen and to have the conversation. And sometimes taking baby steps is the way to go, not try to say, take these leapfrogging efforts, because it's important to get a buy-in from our colleagues as we move forward.
Couple of questions there on the Q&A chart there as well, Chris.
I
Yes.
still have a question. If you look here in United States or Western Europe, the majority of equipment is reusable, disposable, the whole discussion. And of course, we realized that things changed after 2000, 2002, after Bush was elected as president, because he promised to give priority to disposable. What we see now in the Netherlands, for instance, is that even a Savory dilator is considered by some bureaucrats to be disposable. So we waste a lot of equipment more and more. The other thing is we send more and more so-called used equipment to countries in Africa, and rich hospitals in India send them to the poor hospitals, because there where labor is cheap, they make from a disposable or reusable. What should be our attitude and research about reusable and disposable in a rich country like the United States? And also the question back to Iran, what is your attitude in reusable and disposable?
So I don't know if Anahita, you'd like to answer part of Chris's question. I can try to address, and others on the panel can also address the other part in terms of the more resourced countries. So what about in Iran, Anahita, in terms of Chris's question?
We are in the initial phase of the reusable device, but actually in endoscopy unit we use reusable devices for example, snare and such. These devices we use it, but we are in the initial phase. And actually, I see a question. Excellent talk. I mean, all positive change achieved in the UK. What sort of advice can you give me those in the United States who wants to do well, but have the additional challenge of politicization of climate change? I think, Bishr, would you like to take this one?
Sure, I'll try to answer that question. Unfortunately, in the United States, there's politicization not only of climate change, but there's also politicization of things like gun control. But sometimes I think that the way that the message is being presented can be important. So really, sustainability is another term that could be used for climate change, and that might be easier to swallow, no pun intended. And also just willing to sit down and have conversations, not to try to start the conversation by, oh, we disagree, there's no point in moving forward. As much as possible, and this I think was mentioned in one of the prior presentations as well, to try to find common ground as much as possible and use that common ground as a starting point. Instead of using the starting point, oh yeah, we're so different that there's no point in talking. Your ideas are ridiculous. I'm right, you're wrong. It's not totally plus minus that way. So I guess just in general, as much as possible, have a conversation and then try to use common grounds and then layer on top of this steps to move forward.
That's terrific. Well, I've noticed that it's a minute to the hour, which, Guilherme, do you want to have a quick question? It's a minute to the hour.
Yeah, well, great. Just before finishing, I have to just remark about this comment of the involvement of politicians, which is really important because politicians care for things that give them votes. At the end of the day, it's what counts. So how can they have votes from the knowledge from the people, from people awareness? Who is in the best position to provide good, solid, trustful information for people? doctors. So I think at this time it is really interesting to understand that through people we can make the difference. But that means that we have really to focus in education, in training of our peers, in letting them to be really aware of all this situation. And having said that, I have to say that I'm extremely proud for this great webinar series, which WGO can make into life, bring into life, because this is really a landmark for the future. And it is so important that people throughout the world understand that there are some baby steps, as Bishr mentioned earlier, that we can provide so easy. Get one climate change guru in your unit, then get one climate change guru in your hospital, and let's move forward. This way, I think this stepping up, this approach, I think we can make a difference in the future. So congratulations to you all, and thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Guilherme, and that does bring us to the conclusion. I think having the final word from our president is quite appropriate, so thank you very much for that, Guilherme. I think it's fair to say that this has been a landmark series of webinars over the last 3 months. I'm getting that feedback from all over the place, from administrators. I'm getting it from other specialties, not gastroenterology, but cardiology and respiratory, is saying, goodness gracious, we hadn't even thought about such an approach, but we're going to do this ourselves now. I think the other messages that come through are that climate change, it's a tsunami sweeping the world, but it's a tsunami looking for solutions. And when this all started, everyone was throwing their hands up. The teenagers were getting anxious and depressed. It was all going to be too much. But I think what this series is doing is giving us a way forward. I've just spoken in the last few days at the British Society of Gastroenterology annual scientific meeting in Liverpool, and they are doing the things that we are talking about here right now. That is creating committees in each hospital, having a champion in each department in each hospital, making collaborations with other hospitals, with other gastroenterology departments. And so I think this is a coordinated way going forward. The collaborations are intensely powerful. As Guilherme said, it's just not one person who will change the world, but it's the profession through our organizations, through our hospitals. And there's no doubt at all, as Guilherme mentioned, that when the politicians see what we're doing, they have to respond, because they can see that what we are doing is catching the attention of our patients. And that makes sense to them, because votes mean that they have to listen. So I think that's a great time to finish. Thank you to my colleagues on the steering committee. Thank you to the administration at WGO, who have been fantastic at putting all this together. The hundreds of hours have gone into this. Coming down to 9 times 1 hour it's hard to imagine, but I think what we will do is to ask you to use the resource that's up on the website now as you wish. The slides are there, the talks are there. Look forward to it being published as commentaries in GUT later in the year or early next year. And we will have an ongoing committee which will continue the collaborations. And so we look forward to seeing you, speaking with you again in the future. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.